Hello, I'm Mark, and this is a free extract from my online course, Better Business Writing Skills Level 2. Here, you'll learn a wide range of advanced writing skills and techniques. If you want to take your writing further, check out the link in the description. Okay, let's go. Hello and welcome to this second Better Business Writing Skills course. If the first one was about clear English, then this course is about taking things to the next level with even more engaging, even more persuasive and even more memorable writing. Communicating well, writing well is essential if you want to make people think, feel or act differently. And that includes how they think, feel or act towards you. The way we write is one of the key factors affecting how we're judged by our colleagues, our customers, and importantly, by our employers. The truth is that in one way or another, we are all professional writers, and our level of writing skill has a direct bearing on our professional success. Your ability to express yourself clearly and concisely is evidence of intellect, skill, decision-making ability, and good judgment. It's one of the ways we judge our leaders, be it leaders of our country or leaders in the workplace. By doing everything you can to develop your writing, you can also significantly enhance your career. My name is Mark Morris and I'm a professional speechwriter. I've written for many senior politicians in the UK and internationally, including for 2 former Prime Ministers. And throughout my career, I've helped hundreds of people to improve their writing with face-to-face instruction. Not to mention the tens of thousands of people from all over the world online. Giving people the tools, the knowledge and the confidence they need to write better than they ever thought they could. For this second Better Business Writing Skills course, I've teamed up with another writer, my good friend Philip Fisk de Gouveia. Philip, over to you.
Thanks. Like Mark, I'm a professional speechwriter. In fact, I've written for some of the world's most senior political and business leaders. I'm also a former BBC journalist and a playwright whose work for the stage and radio has been enjoyed by thousands of people. So I'm really excited to join forces in this way to pass on some of the tips and tricks that I've learned from a 20-year career to help you, the student, to develop even better business writing skills. And I can't wait to get started.
Philip and I are both passionate about helping people to write better. And while I'll be doing most of the talking, it's very much our combined knowledge and experience that we'll be sharing in the coming lessons. In this course, we're going to share with you some advanced writing techniques, things that it's taken us years to learn. In part 1, we'll discuss what makes writing good, why something we read or hear stands out, why we enjoy it, trust it, or understand it more than something else. We'll examine the use of metaphor and humour. We'll explore variety in your language, playing with rhythm and ensuring its authenticity. Techniques that great writers master. In part 2, we'll take a deeper dive into structure, the all-important architecture of the things we write. Why does structure matter so much? What are the most common and effective structures? What's the best way to present an argument? And how can we use different structures in the writing that we do each and every day? In part 3, we'll take a magic carpet to the land of fairy tales, or at least the world of storytelling. People love stories, and learning to write good ones is one of the most potent tools in your writer's toolkit. We'll show you how to do it and how to use those stories in your everyday writing. In part 4, we'll look at some of the more practical aspects of writing and presenting your work, including the importance of research and formatting, the use of titles and headings. We'll take a closer look at editing and some of the practical things that you can do to ensure that your writing really shines. We'll also be addressing 2 of the biggest writing challenges that any of us face: writing for non-native English speakers and writing within an organisation or a company, where there are often tight constraints on what and how you can write. And finally, in part 5, we'll put everything together and ask how we can apply these lessons when we're writing. We'll look at writing articles, LinkedIn posts, speeches, presentations, and press releases. Importantly, throughout the course there will be short exercises and quizzes, so you can check your understanding and hone your skills. By the end of the course, you'll know things that it took Philip and I years to learn, things we wish someone had told us at the beginning of our careers. One tip before we start: I always try to speak clearly and at a steady pace. If you'd like to speed things up a bit or slow them down, don't forget that you can control the playback speed in the settings. Right, that's enough talk. It's time to get started. Part 1, Good Writing, Section Summary. In the following lessons, we'll look at some techniques that you can use to take your writing to the next level. The things that make a difference between an everyday writer and a really good one. Someone whose writing stands out from the crowd, whose words can change the way people think, feel, or act. We'll look at some of the key decisions that you have to make when writing. I'll show you the impact of varying your words and the way that rhythm and pace can help keep your reader engaged. We'll explore the power of metaphor and imagery, how they can bring ideas to life in the mind of your reader. We'll look at humour, and we'll look at the importance of authenticity, how having the courage to be ourselves can help win the hearts and minds of others. What is good writing? So, what are the characteristics of good writing? I'm not talking here about novels that win literary prizes, but of everyday writing in our offices and workplaces. Good writing serves and achieves a clear purpose. It is appropriate for the task and for the reader. It is easy to understand. In other words, good writing understands and respects objective, reader, and voice. Another way to understand what good writing is to consider what makes some writing bad. Bad writing is irrelevant to the reader. It ignores key issues. It fails to make an argument and makes too few or too many points. It's inconsistent in its tone and style. It doesn't flow logically and is hard work to read. It's probably really boring too. In other words, bad writing ignores objective, reader, and voice. Bad writing comes in many, many forms. It's the email that's too long and complicated. It's the newsletter that fails to share any actual news. It's the speech that forgets to tell us what we need to know or that fails to make an argument. And we all know better than that. Balance. One way to think about good writing, particularly if you're writing something substantial like a presentation or a report, is to consider the concept of balance. Good writing is often about finding a balance between different elements. Author Susan Jones uses a model that thinks about writing from the perspective of the four ancient elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Good writing contains all four elements together in a way that they reinforce each other. Earth represents facts and figures, the earthly things we use to give our writing and arguments substance. Air represents ideas and concepts. Water is emotion and opinion. Fire is energy and passion. We can probably all imagine how a piece of writing that successfully brings those four elements together could be very powerful and persuasive. The very best orators do exactly that. If this sounds familiar, it's because it leads on from Aristotle's ideas of logos, the logical argument, and pathos, the emotional connection, that we looked at in level 1. Decisions. Above all, good writing is about making the right decisions. Writing is one of the most decision-intensive things any of us ever does. Every word, every line, every sentence requires a decision. There's nothing else like it. Good writing is writing that, more often than not, makes the right decisions. Takeaways. Good writing respects objective, reader, and voice. Bad writing ignores them. Good writing balances facts, ideas, emotion, and energy. Good writing is about making the right decisions every time. In the next lesson, we'll look at one of the simplest but most important decisions we make as writers: how long something should be. Length. It seems so simple, but length is one of the biggest writing decisions that we have to make, and one of the decisions that writers most often get wrong. We've all received an email that went on and on and on, or read an article which ended too quickly and didn't tell us what we wanted or needed to know. As with so many things, it's purpose that dictates length. If the purpose of what you're writing is to entertain, then in theory it can go on for hundreds of pages. War and Peace, one of the greatest novels of the 19th century, runs to 587,287 words. It's a lot of words. On the other hand, I've seen work emails that look like this. Mark, 1, yes. 2, no. Well, it's certainly direct. But depending on the objective, that email could be doing exactly what's required of it. For example, maybe it's in response to another email which asked, 1, will you be available next Wednesday afternoon to meet the CEO? 2, have you met her before? Now, depending on the personalities involved, that might be just a little on the abrupt side, but equally for a busy head of operations who receives 100 emails a day, that might be exactly the style of communication that they appreciate. So the rule is, tailor your length to match your objective and your reader. The things you write should be long enough to do the job, no more and no less. For an email, that could be 10 words, or it could be 100. It's rarely much more than that. Social media posts on platforms such as LinkedIn tend to be around 200 to 300 words. Comment articles in newspapers, which need space to develop an argument, are typically around 800 words. Effective speeches, which run to roughly 120 words a minute, come in anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 words. The people behind the TED Talks are even more specific than that. They say a speech should never be longer than 18 minutes, which equates to a little over 2,000 words. Incidentally, that doesn't mean that people always obey the rules. When Fidel Castro was president of Cuba, he set the Guinness World Record for the longest speech at the United Nations at 4 hours and 29 minutes. And his longest ever was a soul-destroying 7 hours and 10 minutes. You can judge for yourself whether a speech that long can ever really achieve its objectives. And that's the key. Does the length fit the objective? As I say, a piece of writing needs to be long enough to do the job, but short enough so that the reader doesn't lose interest. It can be helpful to pay attention to the length of things you read and make a mental note of when and why they feel that they're the right or the wrong length. Ultimately, judging length is something that comes with practice. But if you think something might be too long, it probably is. As a wise person once said, less is more. Or, as a different wise person, no relation, also said, if in doubt, cut it out. Takeaways. Purpose dictates length. Tailor your length to match your objective and your reader. In the next lesson, we'll look at variety, rhythm, and pace. Variety, rhythm, and pace. Writing is an extraordinary tool. It allows us to communicate ideas across time and space to people we've never met, people who live on the other side of the world, people who haven't even been born yet. But it's also so much more than just a functional tool. You know how when you read something really good, it's as if the words on the page take on a life of their own. They become like music. Writing isn't just about what the words mean, it's also about how they sound. As children learning to read, we say the words out loud. We'll often sing those words in the form of nursery rhymes. Throughout our lives, we take pleasure in conversation, in performance, in words and sentences that have a musical value. When your words sound pleasant, it helps to engage the reader. If they're enjoying themselves, they pay closer attention. There's practical value in this. In ancient times, before we wrote things down, it helped people to remember and to pass on stories from generation to generation. The word euphony describes this musical quality of language. It comes from the ancient Greek word euphonos, which literally means well-sounding. How about these lines from Hamlet by William Shakespeare?
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them.
Now, it can be challenging understanding Shakespearean language. Sometimes it takes a few goes. The point is that even if the meaning is not immediately clear, the words themselves are like music. We enjoy the sound of them. Good writers work to understand and then to enhance this euphony. Now, this isn't a course to help you become the next Shakespeare. Heaven knows I'm not qualified. But there are lessons for us all in this. Variety is the spice of life, and the same is true in writing. Let's look at variety in terms of words and sentences. Variety, words. First, it helps to vary the words that we use. In the Level 1 course, I spoke of the importance of using the most simple words possible. So using use instead of utilise, for example. But there are limits. Remember in school when your teacher would tell you off for using the word nice all the time? This is nice, that's nice, he's nice, she's nice, 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 nice. She was right. You need to introduce some variety. Listen to this. I went to the big house. Then I went to another big house. Next to the second big house was another big house. I went there. It sounds like it's been written by a rather bored computer. Now let's look at it again, but with a little more variety in its word choice. First, I went to the big house. When I was done there, I strode along the street to another, this one equally as impressive. Beyond it was a villa of similar size and proportion. This was where my journey would end. Now, it's not exactly award-winning, but the variety of sounds of language makes the second paragraph much more satisfying than the first. Rather than simply repeating big house and went over and over again, we've introduced other words and phrases that mean the same thing. Instead of big, we have impressive, of similar style and proportion. Instead of went, we have strode along the street, where my journey would end. See how I've not just replaced a word with its synonym, but I've thought about how to rephrase the whole sentence to keep the meaning but to add some colour. This is a vital way of adding interest to your work. When you read your work out loud, and you should always read your work out loud, listen for repeated words. Your reader will notice them too, and not in a good way. Give it some thought and change them. Variety, sentences. You need to add rhythm and pace to your work. This means varying the length of the words you use. It also means varying the length of your sentences. If you don't, your reader will get bored. It's a trick I've been using already in this course, probably without you noticing it. Varying the length of sentences makes writing easier to digest. It also reflects the way that we talk to each other as human beings. Sometimes I'll use a fairly long sentence, using a number of different words and phrases to say what I want to say. And sometimes I won't. Varying the length of your sentences, and so changing their rhythm and pace, helps to keep your writing fresh, and it helps to keep the reader interested. Listen to a good speaker and you'll find that at some points they are more engaging than at others. There are highs and lows. Their rhythm gets faster and slower. This is directly related to the length of their sentences. Long ones slow everything down, while short ones speed everything up. I'll end this lesson with a paragraph from one of the 20th century's most celebrated writers, someone who really understood how to please his reader, American writer F. Scott Fitzgerald. The hotel and its bright tan prayer rug of a beach were one. In the early morning, the distant image of Cannes, the pink and cream of old fortifications, the purple Alp that bounded Italy, were cast across the water and lay quivering in the ripples and rings sent up by sea plants through the clear shallows. Now that's euphony for you. It's perhaps a little over the top for an annual shareholders report, but it illustrates the point. The more variety and colour you add to your work, the more engaging it will be. Euphony generally means happier, more engaged readers, and a happier, more engaged reader means our writing is more likely to achieve its objective. Takeaways. Euphony describes the musical quality of language. Introduce variety into your work by varying the length of your words and sentences. The more engaged your reader, the more likely your work will achieve its objective. In the next lesson, we'll look at metaphor. Metaphor and simile. In Level 1, I briefly touched on the contribution that metaphor and simile can make to your writing. Well, it's time to take a deeper look at one of the most powerful tools in our toolkit. And that's a metaphor, by the way. Metaphors and similes are when we compare one thing to another as a way of explaining it, to break down complexity through something with which we're already familiar. For the record, the difference between a metaphor and a simile is this. A simile explicitly compares one thing to another. She's like an angel. A metaphor takes it a step further, suggesting that one thing actually is another. She is an angel. Similes and metaphors are nothing to be scared of, and certainly not the preserve of great writers. We use them all the time. She ran like the wind. One giant leap for mankind. The Iron Curtain. My life's journey. The Cold War. The Industrial Revolution. The World Wide Web. They're commonplace in advertising, news reporting, even everyday conversation. Some metaphors are so effective they become actual words. Broadcasting, for example, comes from the idea of scattering seeds. Computer virus is when your laptop catches a cold. Those metaphors have taken on a life of their own, and we hardly think of them as such anymore. Sometimes metaphors are nouns, but they can also be verbs. The share price fell. He fought the illness. Aristotle said that being good at metaphor is by far the most important gift for any writer. It is a sign of natural genius. Now, I hate to disagree with the great man on that last point, but you don't have to be a natural genius. Metaphor is something we can all learn. But why bother? Well, metaphors and similes are very effective at communicating ideas quickly and efficiently. Using a familiar image or idea helps our readers to understand what we're talking about. They help us to encapsulate complex thoughts in a brief and economical way. They also make our work more engaging, which, as we know, is crucial to achieving your objectives. Metaphors can also help people care about things. If you talk about your company as a living, breathing person, your employees and your customers will naturally feel more sympathetic towards it. A word of warning. It is possible, however, to go wrong with metaphor. Beware, for instance, of using metaphors people are already very familiar with. It can look and sound lazy. As with all writing techniques, a reader can become bored or tired by something if we do it too often. George Orwell said that we should never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech you are used to seeing in print. Metaphors, if overused, can start to lose their power. As ever, you have to judge things on a case-by-case basis. Alternatively, if we get carried away and start to pile metaphor on top of metaphor, our work can quickly descend into hyperbole, or even unintended comedy, and you don't want to be the butt of a joke. Metaphor. Corporate management speak often misuses and overuses metaphors. If you and your colleagues have ever played corporate bingo, you know exactly what I mean. Beware also, of course, of using the wrong metaphor. That can be seriously counterproductive. Even a slightly misjudged metaphor can be confusing and discrediting. I may be British, but I know there's no point in using a cricketing metaphor in a country where no one plays cricket. So when an American colleague once wrote to me saying that the bases were loaded, I'm afraid I had no idea what that particular term meant. Finally, some metaphors can be plain offensive to your readers. For example, an image which may be amusing in one part of the world could have deep religious or cultural significance somewhere else. As ever, think about how metaphors fit into the three key issues of objective, reader, and voice. Does using a particular metaphor help you to achieve your objective? Is it suitable for your reader? Will they understand it and respond well to it? And is it consistent with the rest of the document that you're writing? If you find yourself answering yes to every one of those questions, then you're almost certainly on the right track, which, yes, is also a metaphor. Takeaways. Metaphor and simile explain something new by comparing it with something familiar. Metaphors can be a useful shortcut to understanding. Metaphors can help establish an emotional connection. Avoid overly familiar metaphors. Be certain your reader will understand your metaphor. In the next lesson, we'll look at using humour. Humour. There's a great story about Edmund Gwenn. He most famously played Kris Kringle in the original version of Miracle on 34th Street. Later in his life, he was battling a serious, potentially fatal illness, and his friend Jack Lemmon goes to see him. At Gwenn's bedside, Lemmon asks what it's like to be facing death. Gwenn thinks for a moment and then replies, "Very hard indeed." But not as hard as comedy. Philip and I have written many different things over the years. Speeches, plays, policy papers, radio documentaries, newspaper articles. But ask us what is the hardest thing of all, the thing we most respect in other writers? I'm not being funny, but it's being funny. I mean, people who can write and make others laugh? That's impressive. Comedy, it turns out, is a very serious business. Humour, comedy, wit, satire, buffoonery, irony. There's a whole host of words in the English language to describe that thing we do to make other people smile or laugh. And that's an indication of just how broad and complex humour is. This should not put us off. It may be hard, but if we can make our readers smile, they will reward us with their trust and attention. If something's funny, it can establish what Aristotle calls ethos, that mysterious quality that gives the writer authority in the eyes of the reader or listener. It can help people to relax, which means they're more open to what you're trying to communicate. Time for a bit of science. How does it work? Well, scientists believe that laughter originated as an expression of relief. It was our ancestors' involuntary response to a scary situation that later turned out to be harmless. Laughter releases endorphins, which relax us and make us feel more sociable. Both things you want from people who are reading something that you've written. So should you use humour in your writing? Now that's a matter of judgment, but usually I would say that the answer is, to be honest, no. If you're writing a report or doing the accounts, there isn't going to be a whole lot of room for humour. But if you're writing a speech, giving a presentation, or writing an article, then humour can be really useful. The important thing is to use your judgment. Remember that everything you write has to be about helping you to achieve your objectives. This is about business, not establishing your new career as a stand-up comedian. So if you use humour, make sure that it serves a purpose. Perhaps you want to get your reader's attention, or you want to use humour to reinforce or illustrate a message or idea. That's fine, Just be clear as to what you're doing and why. Okay, so if you've decided to be funny, how do you do it? How do you actually make something funny? The bad news is that there is no secret magic formula. If there was, I'd be busy booking my next arena tour. But it is possible to identify some of the characteristics of things that make us laugh and then experiment with them in our writing. Organic. For me, the most important thing is that any humour you put into your work should be and feel organic. By that, I mean it should feel natural and not in any way forced. So don't start a presentation with a joke about not being able to play cards in the jungle because there are too many cheaters, and then proceed to detail last quarter's sales figures. It's just weird. The utter disconnect between your joke and your presentation will distract your audience and stop them from taking you seriously. But if you come across something funny during the course of writing your presentation, then by all means use it. If something that happened at work made you laugh, and if it's appropriate, then it will probably make others laugh too. Authenticity. Be authentic. Other people's humour will rarely work for you as well as your own. Don't try and copy a favourite comedian. It won't work. Just be yourself and don't force it. It's much better not to even try to be funny than to try and fail. Don't take yourself too seriously. It's okay to gently make fun of yourself. Self-deprecating humour is much appreciated in many cultures, and I do it all the time. But again, know your audience and be careful. Don't go too far and undermine your own credibility. And never undermine the product or service you're trying to sell. Do you remember the story of Gerald Ratner I told in the first Better Business Writing course? He told a joke about the quality of his product at a conference which made the front pages of the newspapers, saw his reputation in tatters, and over £1 billion wiped from the value of his company. Don't do that. Surprise. Humour is often about surprise. The standard setup for a joke is to make your audience think you're going one way, but to surprise them by going the opposite direction. Take this joke. I invented a new word. Plagiarism. You're expecting to hear a new word that you've never heard before, but instead you're tricked. You don't get a new word, but a word that basically means copying an existing one. Jokes never really benefit from explanation, do they? Exaggeration. A lot of humour relies on exaggeration. Take this old Johnny Carson gag. You know, I visited a really small town last week. It was so small, the enter and exit signs were on the same pole. Observation. A great deal of humour is observational, pointing out the funny things that people do, things that we as readers hadn't necessarily thought about, but which we immediately recognise to be true. Like if a child says, "I know when we've got guests, it's the only time Mum laughs at Dad's jokes." Wordplay. Many English language jokes rely on the fact that many words have more than one meaning. Like this one my son told me a few years ago. Why was 6 scared of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. You can have a lot of fun with double meanings, but they only work for very fluent English speakers. So always consider your audience before making this sort of joke. Kindness. A lot of humour is cruel. It's about picking on people, making fun of others. Don't do this. Remember, this isn't just about making people laugh. It's about achieving your objectives and making your reputation. And showing yourself to be cruel is usually not the best way to do that. Similarly, avoid sarcasm and cynicism. There are stand-up comedians who make a living from being downbeat and cynical, but that's unlikely to help you achieve your objectives. But is it funny? And the best advice I can give you? If you've got a joke you want to use, test it with a colleague or friend first. Unless they think it's both brilliantly funny and will help you achieve your objective, perhaps best to leave it out. There is nothing worse than telling a joke and being met with nothing but stony silence. Takeaways. Being funny is hard. Humour can help establish your credibility. Humour should always serve a specific purpose. Only use humour if it really is funny. In the next lesson, we'll look more at authenticity. Authenticity. If I say the word authentic to you, what comes to mind? For me, it conjures up ideas of being yourself, being genuine, true to life, trustworthy. To put it simply, being authentic means saying what you mean and meaning what you say. Within reason, of course, and depending on the context. As it happens, authenticity has become a hot topic in business in recent years. There are whole agencies that specialise in making company executives sound and feel more authentic. In some big companies, authenticity is a quality that executives are formally assessed on. Those judged to be more authentic are considered more suitable for positions of authority. The truth is, employees are more likely to trust and listen to those leaders they believe to be more authentic. In politics, it's often authenticity that makes the difference between success and failure. As a speechwriter, it's important that I help those I write for sound authentic by reflecting their words, their own style, back to them. Imagine if I was writing for a very straight-laced, rather boring English politician and I gave him a speech in the style of, say, Martin Luther King. Now, even if I was capable of such a remarkable feat, and I'm not, it would be a disaster. It would not be in the least bit authentic, and it would do real damage to the reputation of the speaker. However, we can probably all think of politicians who, whether we agree with them or not, do appear authentic, who genuinely seem to be who they say they are. Those politicians owe much of their success to their ability to be, or at least seem to be, authentic. And why does this matter to us as writers? Because the same applies. Think about Aristotle and his notion of ethos, of establishing credibility. We need our readers to trust us, because if they trust us, they're more likely to believe us, to agree with us, and to do what we ask. Earlier in the course, I made the point that while we can't always define good writing, we probably all know it when we see it. And I think the same is true of authentic writing. Being authentically you. Now, there are documents where it's important to be an entirely neutral communicator. For instance, if you're writing up the results of a healthcare study. But there are also many kinds of writing we do where being you is vital. That could be an email to colleagues, a speech, a newsletter, or a comment piece in a newspaper. Being authentic is partly about what you write and partly about how you write it. So don't edit yourself out of your writing. Being authentic on the page sometimes means writing as you speak. Choosing words that you use in a relaxed conversation with your family or friends. Using metaphor and imagery that reflects you as a person. Using language that makes a piece sound like the only person who could have written it is you. What does this mean in practice? Now, big companies often talk in terms of finding and living their purpose, of identifying the why behind everything they do. There's a great story about President Kennedy. On a trip to NASA, he stopped to speak to a man carrying a broom. He said, "Hi, I'm Jack Kennedy. What are you doing?" The janitor replied, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." The janitor knew he was part of something bigger than just mopping floors. NASA's extraordinary why created a sense of purpose and inevitability in their mission. As people, we can do exactly the same. If we know why we do something and why we're writing something, it makes that writing more focused, more effective, and more convincing. It becomes more authentic. And I'm not talking about a superficial why, such as because my boss told me to, or to make money, but something deeper. Why is your company really doing this? If you can find the true answer, it can be a huge help in your writing. Ultimately, there's something of a virtuous circle here. Being authentic helps us to write better, and writing better helps us to be more authentic. A word of warning. Being authentic, saying what you mean and meaning what you say, that has limits. If your authentic self is rude and prejudiced against other people, don't be surprised if being authentic doesn't work out too well for you. Remember, it's objective and reader first, only then is it voice. Takeaways. Being authentic is saying what you mean and meaning what you say. Using your natural voice helps you to appear more authentic. Being authentic can build trust with your readers. Being authentic is not an excuse to be rude or prejudiced. Good writing, section review. In this first section of the course, we've looked at some techniques that you can use to take your writing further. The things that make the difference between an everyday writer and a really good one. We've looked at some of the key decisions that each of us has to take when writing, including the length of your document. We've explored how varying the words, rhythm, and pace of your writing can help keep your readers engaged. We also took a trip into the world of metaphor and simile, devices that can help to transform your ideas and thoughts from the abstract into the concrete in the minds of your readers. And we discussed humour, one of the most powerful and most difficult types of writing, because making your reader smile or laugh when appropriate means they're more likely to pay attention to what you write. They're more likely to think, feel, and act the way you want them to. Finally, we looked at the power of being yourself in your writing, of being authentic, saying what you think and writing as you speak. I hope that's given you some ideas for ways that you can improve your writing. Try experimenting with them at work. You and your colleagues will soon start to see the difference. In the next section of this course, we'll be taking a deeper look at one of the most important aspects of writing, structure. Part 2, Structure, Section Summary. In Level 1 of Better Business Writing, we began to look at structure and why it matters. How it's like a map that guides your reader from where they are to where you want them to be. In the following lessons, we're going to go a lot further. We'll explore the difference between good structure and bad structure. We'll look at some of the most popular and effective structures available to us as writers. Structures you'll see professional writers using in newspaper articles, speeches, even TV commercials, but that are equally as applicable in everything from an email to a presentation. We'll also look at how to do one of the most important things any of us will do at work: make an argument. Why structure matters. Structure is arguably the single most important aspect of any piece of writing. It's no good filling a beautiful home with expensive things if the building collapses. It's the same with writing. As Ernest Hemingway said, prose is architecture, not interior decoration. Above all, structure needs to be logical, and in my view that means it's something that needs to be prepared in advance. Now, the playwright Harold Pinter famously sat down and wrote his plays without thinking in advance about structure or what was going to happen in the plot, but I wouldn't recommend it. The process of designing a structure doesn't just ensure that your work is organised in such a way that the reader can digest it. It can also be a really useful way of making you consider exactly what it is that you want to say. As I said in Level 1, clear words can only come from clear thoughts. Creating a structure requires the ability to look through a jumble of ideas and information and sort it into a coherent whole. Start by asking yourself some questions. What's the big idea or argument? How should it begin and end? What information is essential? What would be nice to have? and what is irrelevant? How can I lead the reader from one key point to the next? Unless you answer those questions, you risk producing a rambling stream of consciousness rather than a coherent document. One of the things to realise about structure is that they're often interchangeable. Good writers aren't fussy. If it works, then it works. A structure that's useful in a TV commercial because it introduces a problem and then provides a solution might be just as useful to us in an email or presentation. At the most basic level, designing a structure is about identifying a beginning, a middle, and an end. When people pick up a novel, they generally give the author a few pages before they begin asking themselves whether or not to continue reading. For most of us, the writing we do, we don't have that luxury. The beginning. Beginnings should get the reader interested, catch their attention, and then equip them with everything they need to know before beginning their journey through the document, including why they should read it. You need to explain the what, the why, and the how. Establish credibility, rapport, a statement of purpose, and signpost what's ahead. The end. Not surprisingly, endings sort of do the same thing, but in reverse. Endings should try to leave no question unanswered, including what do I, the reader, need to do now? Ideally, your reader will understand what they need to do, the reasons why they need to do it, and how to do it. The middle. And the middle bit? Well, that's where you fulfill the main objective of your writing. It might be a story, an argument, some important information, a strategy, a plan. Putting together an outline here can be hugely helpful, particularly if you're writing something longer. If I'm writing a 2,000-word speech for someone, I'll often start with 5 or 6 bullet points to chart what I'm going to say, and crucially the order in which I'm going to say it. Sometimes these bullet points become subheadings, helping me to organise my material and helping the reader to interpret it. A short outline structure is much easier to edit and play around with than a full draft, particularly when more than one person is involved. That's why Hollywood producers and book publishers often prefer a treatment, a synopsis of the plot, rather than a full script. They're easier to digest and easier to change. And that's just as true for a report or a speech. In my job, we'll often agree an outline, a structure, before I begin to write a speech. That allows my colleagues and I to discuss and change the substance of the speech without having to rewrite the entire thing every time. Takeaways. A clear, logical structure is vital for any successful document. Plan and set out your structure before you write. It's much easier to adjust and edit than a full draft. In the next lesson, we'll look at a classic simple structure made famous by Winston Churchill. I hope you enjoyed this free extract from my course, Better Business Writing Level 2. This is the first 11 videos. I hope you found them valuable. If you want to carry on, this course continues for another 28 videos. As well as Churchill, we'll look at other practical and powerful structures. We dive into the art of storytelling, advanced editing techniques, and navigating the challenges of writing within a company or writing for readers who don't have English as their first language. I then show you how to write effective emails, articles, LinkedIn posts, speeches, presentations, and press releases. If that all sounds interesting to you, click on the link in the description below, and I'll see you in there.